Hi all, welcome to this weekly overview of the lab for this week, which is our plant diversity lab. So it's sort of kind of interesting, I guess, that the weather didn't play nicely with us last week, because last week would actually have been when we were supposed to go out and do this lab. And seeing as how last week we got two instances of snow, accumulating snow, and temperatures that barely reached 40 degrees, I'm almost a little bit glad that we happened to be at home, at least just for this week, because the Plant Diversity Lab happens to be one of the labs where we spend a fair amount of time outside, and that would have been not too fun in the cold weather. So if there was a good time to do a lab at home, I guess this would be the time to do it. Although, again, we're going to be missing out on the some of the key parts of this as far as getting a chance to walk around Harper's campus and actually see some of the diversity and the diverse types of habitats that we have on campus. And this particular lab is really our first opportunity to do that. So while I am somewhat sad that we are not in person to do this lab, I'm also not terribly sad because the weather certainly didn't cooperate very well last week. So if you, I'm here in our weekly folder. If you click on our lab materials folder, you will see an overview, the lab instructions as usual that I normally give you all, and then the key information that you'll need to complete the lab this week. So we have our data table as normal. This week we're also going to be using an online calculator. You probably don't remember this because this was like the very first week of class. But in the very first week of class, we actually did an experiment where we were looking at pollution tolerance and aquatic species. And then we did a chi-square analysis to see if our results were relevant, if they were because of the effect of the salt, or if it happened to be just chance that we got the results that we got. So we're going to be using another online calculator. So this particular lab, when you're looking at the lab, there's lots of calculations it looks like that you have to do. But again, I'm more of a fan of using a built-in tool online because it's unlikely that for most of you, you will ever need to calculate species diversity by hand for anything else, including another course. So it's really not necessary to go through the math if we don't need to. So we're going to employ the internet to help us, and we're going to use a tool to get us started on that. So in the instructions here, I talk about what's part of this lab is, again, one of our first opportunities to really go out and look at the different types of habitats we have here on campus. So in this particular lab, the habitats that you would have been looking at are Harper's Prairie, the old field, and also the wooded area. All of these areas, all three of these areas happen to be very close to each other, and they are over on the other side of Harper's parking garage. So the new parking garage structure that's attached to D building, if you go just on the other side of that and you walk along a path there, there's a sort of a wooden fence that runs all the way along that side there. There's also a nice sort of observation deck. It was recently renamed the Craig Stetner Prairie in honor of a colleague who passed away a little over a year ago in the biology department. And anyway, one of the areas that we would have gone to look at would have been in there. And the sort of principle behind this particular lab is to just get a chance to see all of the different plants, a variety of plants that we have here on campus. So how do the plants in the prairie compare to the plants in this old field, which an old field is just land that we stopped doing anything with and we sort of let it grow wild. The prairie is a piece of land that we actually tried to encourage different plants to grow. So we seeded it with plants. So we were specifically trying to get prairie plants to grow there. The old field is just an area where we just kind of let it go, and whatever grows there grows there. The woods is, or the wooded area is an area that is dominated mostly again by trees, but you still have a fair number of plants that are growing there as well. So in the absence of being able to go and actually take a look at these, I did give you all some pictures to look at, and I know pictures aren't quite the same thing, but in my data document here, which describes the different types of plants that we potentially would see in these three different types of habitats, what I've also done is I have also given you some pictures specifically for the plants that are in the prairie and some of the woodland plants. And these are plants that you, again, may or may not be familiar with. And I'm apologizing. I don't know why my computer is taking so long to open this document up here. So we'll give that a second. So while that's working, let me show you the prairie pictures and the woodland pictures. So again, each of these are just sort of a little, you can click on the button here that says view photo and it'll give you a larger picture of what it would look like. So please keep in mind that these are pictures of these plants when they would technically be in bloom. It is unlikely there would be much blooming in the prairie right now. You usually don't see this until mid to late May. So we wouldn't necessarily see these blooms on these plants when we went out in the prairie, but if we gave it time, this is what they would look like. So we have things like prairie smoke and shooting stars, golden alexanders, white wild indigos, blue violets, all of those types of things. Here we go. Here's my document. Sorry it took so long. So here's my data for this week, or here's your data for this week. So what I've given you is I've given you the name of the plants, and I've given you the number that we find. I've done that for the prairie, I've done that for the woods, and then I've also done it for the old field, but with the old field I did a little something different. I actually showed you what it looks like in the diversity calculator that we're going to use. So let's hold on to this part here. Let's not look too much at this here. Let's just look at our data here for our prairie plants. So again, if you want to see what these looks like, I give you a picture of these. So then in your lab manual, and this is again the second lab, so we're on page 12 right now. So in your lab manual, starting at table 2.1, and it's a little bit confusing because table 2.1 goes on for like 3 pages. I'm not sure why they didn't just name it table 2.1 and 2.2 and 2.3. That seems logical to me, but for some reason that's not the way it worked. In any case, the first table is for the prairie plants. So you will write in the name of the plant, and then you're going to write in how many there are. That's it. Nothing else. You're not going to write anything in the total column or the PI column or PI squared or C. You're not going to do any of that. Just the name of the plant and how many there are, and that's it. On the next page, okay, you can do the same thing for, in this case, the old field. So you can take this information that's in my data table also, so the thistle, the fleabane, the dandelion, the meadow rue, and you can go ahead and write those down again, just the name and just the number. And then last but not least, on page 14, we have the same table for the woods. So you would add this data to your own data tables. Okay, so pretty simple so far, right? Next comes calculating D, which D is what we're after here. What we're looking for in this particular lab is we're looking for a way to put a value on the number and types of species we find in these 3 different habitats. So the idea is that species diversity is an important measure in any type of ecosystem. We want to see lots of different types of things, and we also want to see not the same number of one plant versus just a couple of the others. So we also have this idea of evenness. So evenness means rather than having a landscape that's dominated by dandelions, and then maybe you have like a couple of other flowers, right? We would rather see a landscape that has a few of lots and lots of different things. So that's sort of evenness and species richness are kind of measures that we use, and we collectively kind of put that all into this calculation called diversity, right? It's our species diversity calculation. So the more different types of things we have in an ecosystem, the better that ecosystem is set up to withstand changes. So if we have a very, very cold spell, and some of the cold sensitive plants get killed off because they can't handle the cold, when we have high species diversity, there could be other plants in that ecosystem that will survive just fine, and they won't be impacted by the cold, rather than having just one type of plant that is impacted by the cold and then everything dies. And then when the plants die, you have problems because then you are missing those key food sources for our insects. And then the effects are felt up the food chain. That's the idea. So diversity is an important measure because we want to see different things and a variety of different things. So in order to help us determine diversity, we're going to use a diversity calculator. So this is what the calculator looks like once we get everything inputted, but let me actually show you the calculator itself. So the calculator is here where it says diversity calculator. So the first thing you're going to need to know is you're going to need to know how many different types of plants you have. So you would go back to your data sheet and count up the number of different types of plants you have. That's your categories. So let's say I have 8, and then I'll hit submit. And then I would type in those plants that we were just talking about. So we had talked about prairie smoke, and we had talked about golden Alexander, and so on and so forth. So I would put the names of all of those plants here, and then under value, I put how many there are. Okay, so we would hit all of these different values. So I'm not going to sort of do this because I already have an example in the data sheet for you, but once you're done, you hit the submit button, and what you get is you get something that looks exactly like this. So it'll have all of your plants, it'll have the values, it did all of the calculations for you. And what we're getting out of this is not our D, our species diversity. We're going to use a number that's in here though. We're going to use a number, this R1, which is called Simpson's dominance. So Simpson's dominance is going to be a number, it's going to be less than 1, it's going to be between 0 and 1, and this is the number that we're going to use to calculate our species diversity. So you will take 1 minus the Simpson's dominance, and whatever number you get, that is your D, that's your species dominance. So in your lab, or your species diversity, I called it species dominance, it's your species diversity, D. So in your lab here on the line where it says species diversity D, that's the number you're going to put in. So I already gave you the species diversity for Oldfield. I did it for you. I told it was 0.65. So you'd write down 0.65. You'd calculate that for the prairie, and then also please calculate that for the woods. Okay, so down here, and then finally put all of those values here in table 2.2, as well as telling me how many total species were in there. So how many different numbers of plants. So in this case, the number of categories here is the same as the number of species. So 6, 5, 8, whatever it happens to be. And then what the D is, species diversity. All right. And then after that, you just have a few questions to answer as well. I think there's only 3 questions this week, 1, 2, and 6. Okay. So again, if you'd like to kind of get a little picture of what the plants potentially would look like that we would see while we were on our walk through the campus. Again, this is sort of a little bit of an idea. Remember, not everything would be in bloom right now. Most of these things would still be just unfurling in some cases, especially on the trees. We're just right now getting to leaf out on some of the trees, and those buds are just bursting actually. But it kind of gives you a sense of what we would see. As usual, please remember that we also have a quiz this week. So here's your lab quiz number 11. The lab quiz is based on the species stress and diversity lab, which was lab number 5 in your lab manual that you all did the previous week. So not last week. Last week was the exam week, but the week before that is when you did the stress and diversity lab. So please make sure that you look over that lab again and before you take lab quiz number 11. Last but not least, quick thing that I wanted to mention is I am working on some options as far as turning these lab pages into me go. I'm going to provide probably at least 3, if not 4 different options for how to get these pages to me. One is just going to be through Blackboard, one is going to be basically through email, and one is going to be through an app that I've been playing around with, and it seems to be very easy to use. It's called Shobi. So I will put all of that together in an email that I'm going to send out to all of you probably here in the next few weeks, and then you can decide which of these options works best for you as far as how to get these lab pages to me. So that is all for this week. As always, if y'all have any questions, please let me know, and good luck.